I've always considered myself a decent friend, the kind of guy who'd help you move, pick you up from the airport, or spot you a drink when payday's still a week away. But when my buddy Jason asked me to cover his restaurant shift on a Saturday night, I hesitated. "Come on, man," Jason begged over the phone. "It's just one night. My cousin's getting married, and I promised I'd be there. You've bartended before, you'll do fine." I had worked at a bar during college, but that was years ago, and this wasn't some laid-back dive. Jason worked at a busy downtown bistro, the kind of place where people order dishes with names I can't pronounce and pair them with $15 cocktails. "Please," Jason added. "I already cleared it with my manager. They're desperate. I'll owe you big time." Against my better judgment, I agreed. I figured it couldn't be that bad. When I showed up at the restaurant, the first thing I noticed was the energy. It was electric, buzzing with the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, and the occasional sharp bark of a manager's voice. Jason's replacement instructions had been minimal: just keep up, stay polite, and don't mess with the espresso machine. As I was tying my borrowed apron, the manager, a wiry guy named Tom, came over. He looked me up and down, clearly unimpressed. "You're Jason's friend?" he asked. "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound confident. "Fine. You're on drinks. Try not to screw it up." And just like that, I was thrown into the deep end. The first hour wasn't too bad. The bar setup was straightforward, and most of the customers were ordering wine or simple cocktails. I even started to think I might enjoy the night. But then, around 7:30, the dinner rush hit. Suddenly, it felt like the entire city had decided to cram into this one restaurant. Waiters were shouting orders, customers were waving for attention, and Tom was stalking around like a drill sergeant, barking instructions. "Table 5 needs their drinks 10 minutes ago," he snapped at me. "I'm on it," I shouted back, trying to juggle a mojito, a gin and tonic, and 2 glasses of red wine. Things went from stressful to downright chaotic when the espresso machine broke. Apparently, it was a key part of their dessert service, and without it, half the menu was useless. Tom ordered me to figure it out, so I spent 10 frantic minutes watching YouTube tutorials on my phone, trying to troubleshoot the damn thing. Meanwhile, customers were growing impatient. One guy at the bar started complaining loudly about how long his drink was taking, and another couple demanded to speak to the manager because their appetizer was cold. I was ready to throw in the towel when one of the servers, a young woman named Mia, came over. "Hey," she said, handing me a plate of fries. "Eat this. You're turning pale." I laughed weakly and accepted the fries. "Thanks," I said. "No problem," Mia replied. "First night? Does it show?" "A little," she admitted with a grin. "But don't worry. We all crash and burn our first time." Her words, strangely, made me feel better. The rest of the night was a blur. I messed up a few orders, spilled a tray of drinks, and accidentally overcharged someone's bill. But I also started to find a rhythm. Mia and the other servers were surprisingly supportive, covering for my mistakes and teaching me tricks on the fly. By the time the last customer left around midnight, I was exhausted but strangely exhilarated. Tom came over as I was cleaning up. "You survived," he said gruffly. "Barely," I replied. "You did better than I expected," he added. Coming from him, it felt like high praise. The next day, Jason called to thank me. "Dude, you're a lifesaver," he said. "How'd it go?" I told him the truth. It was one of the hardest nights of my life, but also one of the most eye-opening. Working that shift gave me a whole new appreciation for the restaurant industry. It's a chaotic, high-pressure world, but it's also full of camaraderie and resilience. The people who do it every day are nothing short of superheroes. Would I ever do it again? Probably not. But I'm glad I did it once. Second story. I've always been skeptical of Craigslist. Sure, I've used it to sell an old bike and once found a decent couch there, but I'd never delved into the community section. That was until 3 months ago, when a random ad titled "Urgent, Need Driver to Chicago Tonight" caught my eye. It was a rainy Friday evening, and I was scrolling aimlessly on my phone after a long week. The ad intrigued me, not because I needed extra cash, though that wouldn't hurt, but because I was bored and craving something different. The post was short and desperate: "I'm stuck in Minneapolis and need to get to Chicago ASAP for a family emergency. We'll pay for gas, food, and your time. Please help." Against my better judgment, I replied. Within minutes, I got a call from a guy named Eric. He sounded frazzled but polite, explaining that his mom had been hospitalized unexpectedly, and flights were either sold out or way too expensive. "You're my last hope," he said. "I can pay you $400, plus cover all expenses. I just need to be there by tomorrow morning." It sounded insane. Driving 6 hours with a total stranger? But something about his voice convinced me. Maybe it was the urgency, or maybe I just needed an adventure. "All right," I said. "Where should I pick you up?" By 8 p.m., I was parked outside a dingy diner on the edge of town, where Eric was waiting with a duffel bag and a cup of coffee. He looked about my age, early 30s, with a mop of curly hair and a nervous energy. "Thank you so much," he said as he climbed into my car. We set off, rain pattering on the windshield as the city lights faded behind us. At first, the drive was awkward. Eric seemed hesitant to talk, so I turned on the radio and focused on the road. But after about an hour, the silence started to break. "So," I asked, "what's in Chicago, besides your family?" Eric hesitated, then opened up. His mom had suffered a stroke earlier that day, and the doctors weren't sure if she'd make it through the weekend. He wanted to be there for her, but he also admitted there was unfinished business between them. "We haven't spoken in years," he confessed. "We had a falling out when I moved out for college. Stupid stuff, really. But now, I don't want it to end like this." I didn't know what to say. I wasn't exactly close with my own family, so his story hit a nerve. As the miles rolled by, we started sharing more about our lives. Eric was a freelance graphic designer who'd been living paycheck to paycheck since the pandemic. I told him about my dead-end job in IT and my failed attempts to move to a bigger city. At some point, around midnight, we stopped at a roadside diner for coffee and pie. It was one of those places that felt frozen in time, with vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner, and a waitress who called everyone hun. We talked for almost an hour, laughing about random things like our worst jobs and weirdest childhood memories. For a guy I'd just met, Eric felt oddly familiar, like an old friend I hadn't seen in years. The rest of the drive was smoother. We took turns choosing music, swapping stories, and even debating whether deep dish pizza counts as real pizza. He was pro, I was firmly against. By the time we reached Chicago, it was almost 4 a.m. The city was quiet, its skyscrapers glowing faintly against the dark sky. I dropped Eric off at a hospital on the south side, and he handed me a wad of cash before disappearing through the sliding doors. "Thank you," he said. "You have no idea how much this means to me." I nodded, too tired to say much, and watched him go. The drive back to Minneapolis felt surreal. In less than 12 hours, I'd gone from scrolling aimlessly on my couch to embarking on a whirlwind road trip with a stranger. 2 weeks later, I got a text from Eric. His mom had made it through surgery, and they were slowly rebuilding their relationship. "Thanks again," he wrote. "If you ever need a favor, I owe you big time." That night taught me something I hadn't expected. Sometimes, saying yes to the unexpected can lead to the most meaningful experiences. It's easy to stay in your comfort zone, but stepping out, even for a desperate stranger on Craigslist, can remind you of the kindness and connection we're all capable of. Would I do it again? Maybe. But one thing's for sure, I'll never forget that rainy Friday night and the 6 hours that changed my perspective on people and trust. Third story. There's something about small-town bars that feels like stepping into another world. You know the kind, dimly lit, jukebox humming in the background, and a handful of locals who all seem to know each other's life stories. That's where my story starts. I was driving back from a failed job interview in Chicago, feeling like the weight of every bad decision I'd ever made was pressing down on me. Somewhere along the highway, I decided I needed a break. That's how I ended up pulling into a place called the Rusty Nail, a bar that looked as worn down as I felt. I wasn't looking for anything but a drink and maybe a bit of silence, but life doesn't work that way, does it? The bartender, a middle-aged guy with a name tag that read Bill, slid me a beer before I even had the chance to order. "Rough day?" he asked, as though the exhaustion on my face wasn't already answering that for me. I nodded, and for a while, we didn't talk much. That's when he walked in. A man in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, with a rugged look that made you think he'd seen and done everything. He wasn't local, I could tell by the way people gave him a once-over but didn't engage. He ordered whiskey, neat, and sat down 2 stools away from me. We made eye contact, and before I could look away, he nodded at my beer. "Celebrating or recovering?" "Recovering," I replied, surprised he wanted to talk. "From what?" And just like that, the floodgates opened. I told him everything, how I'd been laid off 6 months ago, how every job interview seemed to end in polite rejections, how I was starting to think I'd peaked years ago. He listened, his face unreadable, until I finally ran out of things to say. "You want some advice?" he asked after a long silence. I shrugged. "Sure, why not?" He leaned in slightly, his voice low enough that I had to strain to hear. "Find a red door." I stared at him, confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You'll know it when you see it," he said with a small smile. Then he downed his whiskey, left cash on the counter, and walked out before I could press him further. The bartender chuckled. "Looks like Earl gave you one of his riddles." "Earl?" "Yeah, he comes through here every now and then. Always says something cryptic and leaves. People swear he's some kind of genius or a lunatic, depends on who you ask." I didn't think much of it at the time. But over the next few days, those words stuck with me, find a red door. It sounded ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. A week later, I was walking through my neighborhood, still unemployed and aimless, when I saw it, a bright red door on a building I must have passed 100 times before. It wasn't just any red, it was vivid, almost glowing in the late afternoon sun. I stopped, staring at it for longer than I'd like to admit, before finally working up the nerve to step inside. It turned out to be a community center, offering everything from job workshops to creative writing classes. I don't know what possessed me, but I signed up for a session on resume building that was starting in 10 minutes. That workshop led to another, and then another. Before I knew it, I was volunteering at the center, helping others with their resumes and interview prep. I met people who'd been through struggles much worse than mine and somehow came out stronger. They inspired me to keep going, to stop feeling sorry for myself. A month later, I landed a job, not just any job, but one I genuinely enjoyed, helping others navigate their career paths. The red door, as silly as it sounds, became a symbol of new beginnings for me. Sometimes I wonder who Earl really was. Did he know what his words would lead to, or was it just a lucky guess? I'll probably never know. But every now and then, when life feels heavy again, I think about that man and his cryptic advice. It's funny how a stranger's words, spoken in passing, can change everything. And maybe that's the point. You never know where your red door might be, or what waits on the other side, until you have the courage to open it.